Good evening, and welcome to the 48th Annual URI Fall Honors Colloquium. This year, our series is entitled Race. My name is Rick McIntyre, and I'm Director of the Honors Program at the University of Rhode Island. The Honors Program manages the undergraduate honors curriculum and enrichment and research experience for students across the colleges. We provide advising for national and international fellowship competitions and for pre-med students, and we coordinate this series, the Honors Colloquium, the universities and the state's major public lecture series on the great issues of our time. Come visit us in our wonderful home in Lippett Hall on the Quad. The coffee is free. As director, I have the pleasure each year of appointing the coordinators for the colloquium. And in fall 2010, we have a particularly creative, dedicated, and experienced team. And you'll be hearing from them in the weeks to come. But I'd like to introduce them to you now. Please hold your applause because this is a large group. We have the chair of the Department of Communication Studies, Lynn Derbyshire. From kinesiology, Kyle Coos. From history, Ray Ferguson. Again from communication study, Ian Reyes. From journalism, Kendall Moore. And last but certainly not least, from the Women's Center, Gail Ferris. Please give them a round of applause. They have been working for a year and a half now to make this an interesting educational experience, not only for these public lectures and events, but for the students in the Honors Colloquium class. The Colloquium is co-sponsored by many groups on campus and off, and you have the flyers, I hope, and you can read in the flyers about the various people who sponsored this series. Tonight, I just want to thank and recognize a couple of people. President David Dooley, who is not only a supporter financially, but hosted a reception and dinner for the speaker and a number of guests at his home this evening with his wife, Lynn Baker Dooley. I want to recognize and thank Professor Jody Lisberger, Director of the Women's Studies Program, for agreeing to co-sponsor tonight's talk. Tonight's talk is the 16th Annual Eleanor M. and Oscar M. Carlson Women's Studies Lecture. So thank you, Jody. You want to stand up? There are actually three people from the Honors Program in the room tonight. In addition to me, the Program Administrator, Deborah Gardner, and our Student Assistant, Anna Blake, manage the front of the house. And if you have any complaints, you can talk to them. If you want to tell us how wonderful we are, you can talk to me. In addition, if you're interested in supporting a future series, I'm happy to talk to you about sponsorships, and next year's series will be called Are You Ready for the Future? And we are already planning for that one. Some of you may be aware that the lobby is not available because you came in the side door. During the construction this summer, some wonderful social realist murals were discovered hiding behind the wallpaper, and these needed to be taken down for restoration. We hope to have the lobby back in mid-October. So here's really the only important thing I'm about to say tonight. The women's bathroom is on that side down the stairs, and the men's bathroom is on that side down the stairs. There are exits on either side in the back, and on my left, and on my right, in case of any problems. While we have some issues to deal with in the construction, we are really happy to be here in Edwards Hall, and I'd like to thank Provost Don DeHaze and Vice Provost Dean LaBeauty for their persistent advocacy of the refurbishing of this building, and Paul DePace and his team from Capital Projects for their hard work against very difficult deadlines. This fall, our subject is race. Race is a social construct. We make it up. How we make it up changes. That's the subject for this colloquium series. Racism is a belief that people's capacities are determined by certain physical characteristics. It has historically been a way of preserving the privileged position of entrenched groups. This is not the main focus of this colloquium, but of course it will come up. The world has changed recently, and so our notions of race and racism have changed also. These changes are bound up with new patterns of power and privilege in the United States and elsewhere, but also with the particular American history of race. The environmental crisis, the massive wave of immigration over the past 2 decades, the explosion of new media and forms of communication are some of the factors altering our notions of race and racism in the US and elsewhere that we will investigate this fall. Our first speaker was carefully chosen to both lead off the colloquium and to provide the annual Carlson Lecture in Women's Studies. And to introduce her, I'm happy to invite to the stage the Provost of the University of Rhode Island, Don DeHaze.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I join my colleague Rick McIntyre in thanking the faculty team who put together a thoughtful and critical series that will engage the university and greater Rhode Island community on an extremely critical issue in America today. So thank you all for your efforts and leadership in pulling this together. It is my particular honor to introduce the opening speaker in this, the 48th Annual Honors Colloquium. It's special for me because I met Majora Carter about 8 or 9 years ago. I heard her speak and was immediately inspired by her passion, her leadership, her advocacy, and her sense of importance of community. Majora has said on numerous occasions, and I think has lived this lesson at least over the last 10 years, that you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. And she has shown that that notion has environmental and economic implications that span the globe. Yes, she was born and raised in the South Bronx, and she continues to live in the South Bronx today. In 2001, Majora Carter founded a nonprofit environmental justice solutions group known as Sustainable South Bronx. Her first major project was to write a $1.25 million federal transportation planning grant, which would convert an 11-mile stretch along the South Bronx Greenway into an alternative transportation network, local economic development, low-impact stormwater management, and recreational space. Beautiful space, space where people can live and enjoy their life. This, in some ways this is sad to say, was the first new South Bronx water park in over 60 years at that time. The work of Sustainable South Bronx, and Ms. Carter specifically, is really focused on creating urban forestation, green roofs and walls, water-permeable open spaces that clean the air, reduce urban heat island effects, effectively manage stormwater runoff, and maybe most importantly, calm the soul, create jobs, create economic development, and create vital communities. In 2003, Sustainable South Bronx opened the Bronx Environmental Stewardship Training Program. This was a 10-week short course to train locals in the area, many who had had very difficult and tough lives, around green-collar jobs, with a highly successful 85% employment rate of graduates of this program, and now 10% of those graduates are in colleges and universities today. Majora Carter is a 2006 MacArthur Genius Fellow, one of Essence Magazine's 25 most influential African Americans, one of the New York Post's 50 most influential women for each of the past 2 years. She currently serves as the president of the green collar economic consulting company called the Majora Carter Group. Majora Carter is a graduate of the Bronx High School of Science. She has a bachelor's degree from Wesleyan University and a master's in fine arts from New York University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the University of Rhode Island campus, Ms. Majora Carter.
Good evening, everybody, and I'm really thrilled to be here talking with you guys tonight about, I know that the topic of the whole series is about race, but what I'd like you to think about during this talk is actually thinking about how race can just inform things that we're doing, but also see, and I think it's important to acknowledge, what it did, but also understand that it's just also something else that we can use so that we can learn from as well. And so I have to tell you a funny little story. When when my husband and I first got married, part of our honeymoon, we spent in Paris. And we heard this really hilarious little thing about my neighborhood, which is, when something happens, like, you like bang your elbow on a room, or you walk into a messy room or something like that, or your kid does something, that you don't like and goes someplace you don't like, a French person would say, "Oh, that's Le Bronx." And I'm like, excuse me? And basically, it's French slang for a hot mess. And I was just like, that's kind of really not exactly the way that I'd like to think of my neighborhood all the time. Although at some point, I think there is something to that. And so the way that I like to tell the story about the work that I do, it is a story about race. But it also is what happens when you don't acknowledge that there's something that can actually be done with the future that's being built. So here we go. When my parents moved into what later became known as a hot mess, it actually was not. They were part of that great migration, blacks coming from down south, the agrarian south, up north in search of their own great American dream, working in different places up there in the industrialized north. And my family ended up settling in a place called Hunts Point in the South Bronx in New York City. And it was at the time a mostly white working class community. And the neighborhood itself was literally, you walked to work. There was the residential core, and then you walked into the manufacturing area where there was lots of different types of manufacturing. And my neighborhood, interestingly enough, used to be known as Little Pittsburgh because of all the steel work that was done there. Folks like my parents from the South also followed suit. Then later on, folks from the Caribbean, starting with folks from Puerto Rico, started coming into the community. And white flight was a term that was created around that time. And it was basically when real estate agents would say to working class families living in these areas that, well, the blacks or other colored folks are coming, so you should leave now because the property values are going to drop. And then they would sell, for cheap, and then they'd sell it at a higher level to other folks. And this was also the time of the major highway construction boom all over America, where literally, highway quote-unquote planners, like this gentleman in New York State, were creating different, plans for highways, but not really thinking about what were the long-term effects of how you actually move people, around at all. And sometimes it was done without very little, or with very little foresight or thinking of what's actually going to happen in a community. And in the Bronx, in particular, we had a very difficult time because we were between what were considered two pretty wealthy counties, Manhattan and Westchester, and literally the Bronx became just the way to get between those areas. So we have a spaghetti network of highway that's actually very, very badly done, and people were often, I show this picture, this is of the Cross Bronx Expressway, because it literally was sort of placed on top of a pretty thriving community, or rather several thriving communities as it was being built. So this clearly is not the very first financial crisis that we've been in this country, obviously. And one that happened, starting in the 60s was one that involved banks deciding where they were going to make investments or where they were not going to make investment, which was even more important. And it was the term called redlining is what happened. Literally, they'd get a map, the bank presidents and their teams would draw in red China marker around the areas in which they were not going to make any kind of investments. And this happened all over the country. And it was mostly in poorer communities and poor communities of color as well in those areas. And my zip code was actually in 10474. And this is around the time that I came in during a very early networking opportunity. I'm on the phone with Santa, and Easter Bunny's there. And but this is what I grew up with. Remember, no kind of real financial investment coming into the communities, and landlords often found it a much more profitable thing to have their buildings torched, to commit arson, rather than to try to find investable dollars that just weren't there. So committing arson to collect insurance money. And so this is basically what I saw during all of my early, formative years, long before I was 10, happening on a fairly regular basis. This also coincided directly, with lots of funding coming into the cities, or rather being pulled out of our cities in terms of playground equipment and programs for arts and music in our classrooms, and these basically became our sort of de facto playgrounds. And unfortunately, but I do remember very clearly remembering the nightly news and hearing my neighborhood on it as this awful place where nothing but bad things happened and crime was all around, and it was sort of like a war zone, even though I knew this was after the Vietnam War. And even my brother, who had served 2 different tours in Vietnam, was home, but not for very long, because he was actually gunned down in the neighborhood next door to ours. So that type of financial investment really just was the perfect environment for the type of environmental problems that came later. Because remember, the financial disinvestment meant that property values were really, really low. Businesses in this former very thriving manufacturing and economic zone were just going out of mostly out of the country, and it made the perfect environment for things like the waste facilities that later came. Because remember, these were all industrial factories. When the organized crime mob got involved in waste handling, places like the South Bronx, because it was politically a great place to work, because it was very poor, it was of color, and thus it was politically vulnerable, and nobody was looking out for the people in our communities. So we got to see an enormous amount of this kind of infrastructure coming into our communities, all at some severe impacts, to the people that living in the community. So I do consider myself an environmentalist, and the kind that I do is based on the principles of environmental justice, which simply means that no community should have to bear the brunt of lots of environmental burdens and not enjoy some environmental benefits. And that sounds sort of like a perfect basic kind of human right, but in actuality, it doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, in this country, race and then class will tell you exactly where you'll find the bad stuff, like waste facilities and power plants and things you see in this area. As opposed to where you find some of the nicer things, like really beautifully well-maintained parks and things that don't impact your health. And unfortunately, that for race and then class are the indicators that show you that kind of thing. And but these are not just the things that really work. You want to have environmental equality where there is a certain level of both, where people are benefiting from having the environment around them, because it ultimately benefits everybody, no matter what the racial or class demographics in a community are. But those things are not just nasty things to look at, which they are, or to smell, or to have around, but they also clearly have some pretty significant impacts to your health. In particular, respiratory issues and things of that nature. But one of the things that was most concerning to us when we discovered that it was absolutely conclusively proved was the study that Columbia University did back in 2006 that showed that proximity to fossil fuel emissions actually cause learning disabilities in young children. And where do you find those kind of proximity to fossil fuel emitting sources? You find them generally in poor communities. And that's where the poor schools are. And that's where we know statistically that poor kids that do poorly in school statistically go to jail in this country. We may make up 5% of the world's population, but we produce 25% of the world's prisoners. And they come from predominantly poor communities in our cities rather. And that's a really difficult stat, that we have to deal with in general, but I think it's really important that we know that. But I want to show you some other things like this. I come from a neighborhood that was at one point, a working neighborhood, literally, and the whole neighborhood worked like that. And now, when at one point during America's history, we literally were major producers. Since that time, we've become amazing consumers. We're really, really good at it. Our whole economy is actually dependent on, in large part, on the relationship we have with China that produces really cheap consumer goods for us, and that kind of feeds the kind of things that you see, big box stores, and the kind of all of what fossil fuel generated sources that we're dealing with. That is the basis of our economy. It is absolutely fossil fuels. But being a nation of producers and really understanding that at some point, the hard-won labor and environmental laws that we really should be very proud of. I mean, literally blood was spilled over both of those things in this country. And we kind of don't even have the benefit of really having those things that we can talk about right now because so much has gone overseas. So we have to wonder, how much of this is something that we really want to hold on to. So these mountains is sort of it's very typical mountain range in Appalachia. This sort of probably in West Virginia, and this is what it looks like after it's been shorn of the top of the mountain through mountaintop removal coal mining in search for just a few years worth of coal. And I show you these pictures, because obviously this is not the South Bronx. I mean, the South Bronx is the birthplace of hip hop. This particular former mountaintop is in a place called Whitesville, which is definitely not vying for that title. But the idea that there is a connection between where we extract our fossil fuel resources, where they're refined, where they're burned, all of those things tend to happen in communities where there is a big amount of poverty. I'm standing here literally with my friend Judy Bonds on looking down on the piece of land that actually held the hollow of the valley that she lived in. Her grandson would have been an 8th generation, person who had lived on the land from her family. Everyone before that were actually coal miners, the ones that literally wore the helmets with the light on the head, that they walked down into the mines, and some of them met, unfortunately, their end there. But that is not the state of coal mining at all right now in America. It's a much different operation that's really highly, highly toxic and really brutal to the land and to the people that are around it. So Judy is actually working really hard to save the rest of the mountains that are still there and put renewable, windmill, energy on top of them. And because for them, it's about how do you not just have, a few years of energy from a fossil-based fuel, but how do you create better opportunities to have a lot more for everybody, everywhere. And so in terms of the kind of impacts that they're seeing, this, because of just the nature of mountaintop removal coal mining, and how abusive it is to the land and the kind of chemicals that they use to do it, it totally messes with the water table down there. So this water actually came from a local, person's tap, after some of this mine. It's pitch black, and I saw a lot of it while I was down there, unfortunately. And so they also are dealing with other kind of problems, in terms of some of the cancers that they have. Judy, unfortunately, is actually, I don't even know the results of the biopsy that she just got. For the masses that they found in her lungs as well. And that's just not even going down into the mines, just from just living down there. So whether it's that, or whether it's asthma in our cities, or even diabetes and obesity, which also have their links to the fossil fuel-based economy in terms of how we access food or don't access it, in terms of what we're breathing. All of these things are related to the fact that we have an overdependence on fossil fuels, in our country right now, and have for some time. And so, when Judy and I first met, we actually kind of we swapped t-shirts. My slogan was Green the Ghetto, and hers was Stop Mountaintop Removal, but the back of her t-shirt says, Save the Endangered Hillbilly. So if hillbillies and homegirls can understand that the way to move our country forward is by creating opportunities that allow us to move toward environmental equality for everybody concerned, then I think everybody can. Because that's what's so great about the idea that what equality does, I don't care what anybody says, all the great pieces of our country's history, whether it was the civil rights movement or American independence or women's rights, though everything that happened during it was really hard, but the issues that happened afterward, we all benefited from them. Environmental equity or equality is no different at all from that. And so how I got my start in this, growing up in the South Bronx, the last thing in the world I was trying to do was stay there. If you grow up and hear your neighborhood talked about as if you were nothing, if you come from this place, you're nothing but a pimp, a pusher, or a prostitute. After a while, you kind of think, maybe I should disassociate myself from it. And so literally, it was on my mind since I was about 10 that my goal was to get out, go to a really good high school, and then go to a college where I would not have to live in New York City. Because God forbid I have to stay home. And I did. I totally accomplished that goal. I was really excited, and I was really happy. And then I got into graduate school, and I was really broke, which in New York City, which meant I had to find a really cheap place to stay, and the cheapest place was my parents' house. I was so defeated, I can't even tell you, but fortunately they let me stay, which was nice of them. But the best thing about it was that I got to move back into my neighborhood at one of the most fascinating times in my neighborhood's history, which is when the city and our state were planning on building, they decided to privatize waste handling in New York City. And again, I was not trying to be a part of my neighborhood. I was just like, I just sleep here, okay? And then I leave. But when this happened, I realized that, so many of the things that I had heard, from there being really high asthma rates and other kind of respiratory problems, that they somehow might be related to the pollution that was already in the neighborhood. And then to come to find out that our city and state were also planning on allowing this brand new company to come in to build another huge waste facility that would have brought an additional 40% of the waste processing in New York City into the neighborhood. And I thought, that just doesn't sound right. It just doesn't. And why is this happening? It's not like we're producing that much waste. What is it about what's going on here? And it became really clear to me, and after I did a little research, that it was because our community was as politically vulnerable as it was, because it was as poor, perceived as a poor community of color that nobody was going to speak up or speak out. So you could do those kind of things to it. And it was very clear that we were being discriminated against because of our race and our class. And at that point, I felt like the veil was just ripped off my eyes, and I realized I could do one of two things. I can be a part of trying to create some change, in this place and use whatever resources and power that I have to make a change, or I can pretend that it really doesn't exist, and I can go on my merry little way and get my little degree but write the great American novel and make the great American screenplay. That was my plan. And I still haven't given up on that plan. But what the first part is obviously what I decided to do. And getting to that point and seeing how that happened really did help us, galvanize the community, not just in our neighborhood, but around the entire city, to really encourage our city and state to expect and get a solid waste management plan that didn't disproportionately discriminate against the poor communities of color in our city. And we got it a couple years ago, which was a really awesome thing. But doing that kind of work really helped me think about, I knew what we were fighting against, But I wasn't necessarily clear, and most of my neighbors were not clear about what exactly we were fighting for, because there were still all sorts of issues in our community. We still, had this really high, public health crisis thing going on, especially around asthma. We still had a very high unemployment rate. We still had a lot of people that honestly felt like there was no hope in their lives if they stayed in their communities, but they didn't have any ways to go, because they didn't have the luxury of having advanced degrees, or the type of job skills that would make them go or be able candidates for different types of jobs. And so those were real things in my mind, and a lot of other people's too. But the thing that made me stay, true story, this dog. I got It's around the time we were still fighting against this waste facility. I kept getting these notices actually from a group that was working with the U.S. Forest Service about wanting to offer these little seed grants to do Bronx River restoration projects. And I thought that was fine and dandy, except to my knowledge, even though I knew I lived on a peninsula, surrounded on three sides by water. My elementary school was called the Hunts Point Peninsula School, but I couldn't, I'd never seen the water from my neighborhood because of all the kind of, industry that we saw around town and around, on the waterfront. So it's like I never got to it. But when I got this dog, she took me jogging, or I took her jogging, and then she pulled me where she wanted to go. And where we ended up one day was in this nasty garbage dump. And I was just like, if I didn't have an 80-pound dog in front of me, there is no way I would have gone into this place. And this is not what it looked like when I found it. It literally, there were tires and weeds and garbage over my head. And again, this dog was literally like barreling through it, and I was right behind her. But what we discovered at the end of this disgusting garbage dump was actually, in fact, the Bronx River. And if you completely ignored the fact that there was just all this junk and this dump behind you, and just looked only at the river, and it was about a 40-foot span of it, and it was about 6:30 in the morning, and the sunlight was glinting off of it, and it was just this remarkable sight that I'd never seen in all of my, at the time, like 30 years or so. And I flipped out and went home and actually wrote the proposal, which we later got. And I was able to get all sorts of people to think about the possibility of having a waterfront park in our community. We got everyone from different community volunteers. We got every volunteer group we could in the city. We also got lots of businesses to support us as well. And then we were also able to get the city to commit to $3 million to turn it into this. And this is what this is an older picture, but this is what it looked like literally the day after it was built. And it's since become this tremendous, beautiful place in the community where people have really embraced it as theirs. And it really, literally the first waterfront park we had in more than 60 years. And it took a little while, I think, for people to realize that it was actually theirs and for them, and not for somebody else to come and play in. But when they did, they realized that it was theirs and it was worth protecting and being a really beautiful space. And it's since become just that. And actually, 2 days after it was built, I actually got married there, with Zena, of course, as my flower girl. But in addition to it just being a really fabulous place to get married, which it was, it also happened to be the sort of like that kind of light bulb in people's heads. Were like, what else? Again, we were used to not expecting much or anything. I mean, it was just like we weren't even looking for crumbs to fall off the table, frankly. But now it suddenly was just like, you know what? We've seen what beauty and something nice in our community looks like. Maybe there's more out there. And someone told me about this federal transportation, program that offered grants to do feasibility studies for programs that actually alleviated congestion and got people walking and doing alternative forms of transportation. And so it was a $1.25 million grant that I wrote and got to design the feasibility study for this and design for the South Bronx Greenway master plan. And the idea with that was that it was all about how do you create different opportunities for basically a greenway is just it's a dedicated bike and or pedestrian path that doesn't allow any other cars or anything on it, but just people, and allows them to move on it freely, unconstricted. But it also provides some really awesome opportunities for things like stormwater management management because you want to build it so that it's green as much as possible. It also can, create the kind of atmosphere so that you can do local economic development nearby because those are the kind of things that build community. As you have more people doing good things out in a neighborhood, that's the kind of thing you want to do. So we were also able to raise nearly $50 million worth of funds to start building the Greenway. So, and also, but the Greenway, just so you know, it's a little linear park. I mean, it's real skinny, and but the idea is that it connects you to different, bigger parks and other parts, of your community, city, and in the coast of the East Coast Greenway. There's the one that runs all the way from Maine to Miami, and now we're connected to it. So this here is a piece that connects the South Bronx to to Randall's Island, which is a 400-acre, really cool park. And this is what it's going to look like after we start building. And this, I so love construction pictures now. I can't tell you, because this means that there's progress, and the bridge is actually almost done right now to Randall's Island. This is the street that leads down to the park I showed you, Hunts Point Riverside Park, and this is what it's going to look like as they start doing construction. And this is what construction looks like. And this is really funny because my office is only a block away from this. And so they took the opportunity to redo all of the water main infrastructure, which is a century old. And so they, of course, would have to shut off the water. And so my office didn't have water for like a week or so, which was awful. And I'd like walk into the office and I'm like, who's responsible for this crap? And I realized that would be me. So, and so hopefully by this time next year, I will forget about the fact that we had to walk around the corner to someone else's office when we had to use the bathroom. But it's all worth it as far as I'm concerned. And but here we are, a community that actually has, when we did a tree count, we had about the same ratio of trees that they had in the Warsaw Ghetto after the bombings, like one tree, per acre. Something like that. And that was after a war, and this is just, normal for us. And so we were a community, even though many of us came from, or rather, not my generation, but the generation right before, came from places, down south where there was farms and all sorts of land, or from the Caribbean where, again, there was this people were used to being around nature, and yet there was a whole generation of people that weren't. And so most of us really had no connection whatsoever. But we knew that if we were going to inspire people to think about the environment in ways that actually was meaningful to them, we had to come up real quick with a way to do that. And so the way that we did it was we started one of the country's first green collar draining and placement systems that allowed folks to sort of have both a personal as well as a financial stake in improving the environment. And because a lot of folks would think that, the environment's something that, white people do. And on some level, the way that it's done, I agree. But when people see their self-interest tied up into it, they will absolutely, hop to it. And this was a way to do it. And so we took it upon ourselves to create a program that trained people in the field of environmental restoration. Everything from wetland restoration, which was the first work that needed to be done, on the waterfront as we worked to reclaim it for the local communities, to urban forestry management, as we realized the positive effects of tree planting in our communities. Green roof installation, even learning how to clean up contaminated lands or brownfield remediation, and doing all those things, with people who were right there. And most of the folks in our local communities were people who had been formerly incarcerated, or folks who had been generationally impoverished, single moms on welfare. Many of them who had never actually even had a parent, in there, or another person in their household that actually had a job for very long. So people didn't even have the experience of knowing what it was like to be a working person. So we also had to teach people how to do that as well. Teach them how to be like leaders in their own lives. Like, how do you be a team player? How do you develop the aptitude to become, be a self-starter? How to make sure you look busy when your boss is around. I mean, y'all know how to do that, but if someone didn't tell you, you wouldn't either. So it's things like that, or just the kind of the soft skills that really allow you to become skilled in your own life were also the things that we had to teach people in order to do that. And the success rate that we had was the kind of thing that made us go like, wow, this was really an incredible gift that we were able to give to these folks, who also in turn turned around to give that same gift right back to their families and to their communities. Because these were folks who, especially the guys who, and actually a bunch of the women too as well, our recidivism rate in jails in New York is about 70%. So 2 out of 3 people, if they ever go to jail in New York, 2 out of 3 of them will go back. But because of this program, people that went through our program, for the most part, did not. So I really should send New York City a bill for all the people that I kept out of the public role. I really should do that. I keep saying I will. But another thing that we wanted to do was show that green wasn't just this liberal latte drinking, Birkenstock wearing, Berkeley going, whatever kind of thing, because that just doesn't appeal to a lot of people. It just doesn't. And but we knew that this green thing actually could save people money, could make people money. And so we actually started our own green roof installation business to show just that, and to get people employed, but to show that there was actually a profit to be made. And so we started this company, and green roofs, for those of you that don't know, it's a sustainable building technique that's actually been used in Europe for more than 50 years right now, where you plant a roof. They actually use it for stormwater management benefits, and actually in Germany now it's a part of the code for fire prevention as well. But you plant a roof, it absorbs stormwater. When you do it in mass, it actually reduces the ambient air temperature, because it's a green layer, and those are automatically cooler than regular asphalt or concrete. And it reduces your urban heat island effect. It's a green layer, so it also literally cleans the air as well. And all of these things, and you're probably wondering why I'm showing people working. It's because these are jobs that cannot be outsourced at all. So it's not like you're going to send your roof somewhere, to get it to be done. It's got to stay right here, which we think is awesome. And this was the work that was being done on my house, planting little seedlings. It was a really fun job, actually. I helped out too. A couple years ago, this is my upstairs neighbor, who of course had to come and survey the work. And this is what it looks like now. And the first one that we did was actually on Sustainable South Bronx's headquarters, where we wanted to show there are different things you can do on a roof, depending on how much, weight your roof could actually hold. And so this is the medicinal herb garden that we planted. And also we wanted to show that there were also opportunities for urban agriculture as well. And really, really, really good strawberries was my favorite. And so this is not to say that, these are, the next 2 pictures are of large-scale municipal water systems, sewage treatment system, a combined sewage, and all processed through something kind of like 1 or 2 of these. And there are many different ways that they look, but I like those 2 pictures. And it's not to say that, doing those kind of low impact developments, things like green roofs that do absorb, between 75 to 90% of the stormwater that falls on it, so that it doesn't have to ever be processed through this sewage treatment system, which are single use, very energy intensive. Very energy intensive. Nobody wants to live near them, but they all pretty much are almost always located in poor communities as well. So why would you not want to use the kind of things that can provide, different kinds of opportunities that have multiple benefits as well? And so also another thing that I love about green roofs is, for any urban area, about 20% of the land area is rooftop. Just straight up, about 20%. So just imagine if we created green roofs on a whole bunch of those things. Imagine the stormwater management benefits and the savings, to municipal costs. Imagine, how much cooler the ambient temperature, of a city would be. And just imagine the air cleansing benefits of it as well. And also, of course, the jobs that are created as a result of it. And so this type of training and we think that this type of the training and employing people to do those type of environmental services, whether it's green roof installation or urban forestry management, creating bioswales, any of that kind of stuff actually provides the environmental services real cost effective. I mean, even under the Bush administration, it was not all that nice to a lot of the kind of environmental, things that we want to see happening. Even that administration actually put out a huge report about how low impact developments like greening is actually dollar for dollar more cost effective than your traditional big massive hard infrastructure project. Like, this stuff is out there. So when you think about the kind of cost savings that you get when you use these kind of techniques, why would you not want to train and place people to do that type of work? In addition to the other social benefits that it provides, there was another fantastic study that was done by the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign's Laboratory for Landscape and Human Health. They did this study where they looked at Cabrini Green, which is one of the nation's, at the time, one of the most notorious housing projects. I mean, it was just, it actually probably made the South Bronx look like Disney World in a lot of ways. But they did this study where they looked at two parts of the neighborhood. One area, had a bit of the housing complex that had no vegetation, no urban forestry. And the other one, pretty much same type of complex, same demographics of people, but that one had, some street trees, some landscaping. And they discovered that the people who lived in the area and had direct access with that greenery, that the adults had lower stress levels, that the kids tested higher in school, that there was less crime in that area because people actually congregated outside more to be together and build community. And this was the thing that I love the most about the study. It actually showed that young girls had higher self-esteem. And how were they able to quantify that? Because the teenage pregnancy rate in the place that had the urban forestry was lower than it was in the place that didn't. Girls that feel confident and sure about themselves and their future generally tend not to throw it away by having a child when they're a teenager, in general. And so that was, I thought, a really powerful thing. So you've got these social benefits, you've got the environmental and the economic benefits. Why aren't we doing more of this type of stuff that I think is really a powerful, powerful tool? And that's one of the things that we're really working hard to push, in particular with the company that I started 2 years ago after I left Sustainable South Bronx. And we do green project development. And our idea is to really help and show different stakeholders, whether it's the government, municipalities and otherwise, grassroots groups and local communities, and also even businesses, that the green economy, such that it is and such as it could become, is exactly what we need in order to really create the kind of country in which we want to live in. That it has the capacity to really create really beautiful local economies that can meet the needs of everybody there, so that nobody's got to move out of their neighborhood in order to live in a better one, regardless of the color of that community, and that you're creating economic opportunities so that it's not just about how do we take care of the poor people, but how do poor people become less poor? Because that's really what it's about. And so some of the things that we're working on, they're all like based on the idea that, or not just the idea, the facts that our climate is changing, that there's been a degree of environmental degradation that has had serious impacts to very specific, to the world in general, but the concentrated impacts almost always are seen first in poor communities of color. So when we looked, at our Gulf and Atlantic coast, long before BP ever even happened, and knowing that those areas are seriously going to be impacted by sea level rise in all of our lifetimes. I mean, we just, in northeastern North Carolina, this particular picture, that's the street, you see the little truck, and then there's obviously some street going on there, where the water is right there, that used to be dune. That used to be beach, and then it was water. But now that we're having 100-year storms in that region, like every 3, this is becoming more, you're more likely to see this than not. And so this is happening a lot. And so in these regions, we're trying to come up with strategies that will help those regions move forward to develop climate adaptation plans, because it's not about mitigating climate anymore. The damage has been done, clearly. So now it's like, how do we develop the opportunities to deal with these mostly heavily rural areas, and to create better opportunities, places that did a lot of, tobacco and cotton, and turn them into areas where you can actually meet the needs of the future by developing real climate adaptation strategies and local economic development policies around them, so that you're training the people to do the type of work to restore these places and to also make the communities more resilient going forward, whether it's through stormwater management techniques, etc. We also were doing some work in New Orleans. We were invited by Brad Pitt's work group to do a conceptual green collar job program, but the reason we stayed was this man and everything that he knew and told us. We're standing here in an overlook of the Beyond the New Bayou in the lower Ninth Ward. And that area that he's standing by, and he was telling us these fond memories of how, he would go fishing in this place, and it was the source of sustenance for his family and many of the other families, that were there during his youth, about, 70, almost 80 years ago at this point. And, but he said that these cypress forests, and that doesn't look much like a cypress forest because it isn't anymore, that these were the places that used to exist off that area. For those of you that don't know, these cypress forests or Tupelo forests, or whatever tree they're called, they're wetland trees. They're all freshwater trees. These are the natural sponges, of the Gulf and Atlantic coast. They're the things that actually, if they were there, would actually, slow the storm surges that would happen whenever there's hurricane season. As a matter of fact, Mr. Taylor was telling us that he lived through Hurricane Betsy 40 years before Katrina, as well as Katrina. And Hurricane Betsy was a much stronger storm than Katrina. But so why was the impact as bad as it was, just a few years ago, even though it was a much, a hurricane of a much lesser degree? Partially it was because, the levees broke, which was obviously the fault of our Army Corps of Engineers. The other part of the fault was that the wetlands that had been there that actually protected the coast during Hurricane Betsy 40 years before had also been destroyed, because the Army Corps of Engineers had made these canals moving water from the coast that was seawater, salt water, into these bayous, which was fresh water, and destroyed the wetlands, which was that area's natural protection. So, of course, it was going to be bad. So what we're trying to do is think of ways that we can help our federal government and also state level planners understand the importance of creating a kind of national or even statewide or local job corps that would allow folks to do the kind of wetland restoration, to create to restore these areas, to support those great number one job development, but also create the kind of environmental services that are needed right now. And we're affectionately calling it the Hometown Security Corps, because the idea is that you have that doing these kind of environmental services actually does provide exactly what you need. And it's interesting that if you overlay those coastal areas, those are also the areas where there's the most intense poverty as well. Interesting how that happens. The areas that's most environmentally degraded, and that's where you find the most poor people. It's not a coinky-dink at all. So our thing is, why would you not want to create the kind of job creation vehicle that is there, that's already there to do this type of work, that can support their own areas? And I'm hoping that we get at least a few of these off the ground before our friend Mr. Taylor, dies. Oh God, it's just amazing, but what he's been through, and I do hope he gets a chance to see it. Another thing that we're working on is really trying to disrupt the whole idea of what the American food system has become, and really just like spin it on its head. I mean, right now it is really pretty much owned and operated by a handful of folks, where it's cheaper to get food, that's grown outside, either in California, or in South America, to come up here. And often, at the expense of our health in terms of the pesticides and herbicides that are in it right now. And it's also because of the way that the food system functions here that, it's cheaper to buy crappy food than it is to to buy food that's actually healthy for you. And we know that much of our regional, food production, because they don't have the lobbying power, of the folks that have produced really, bad food. They're shut out of so many of the bigger markets, and also it's still seasonal. We're actually working to create a national brand of urban grown produce that will allow us to not only sort of aggregate much of the produce that's being grown regionally, but also supplement it through in-city growing opportunities in greenhouses using aquaponics and hydroponics. So you can actually meet some of the institutional demand for that produce, from hospitals, from schools, corporate cafeterias, and really create markets for the food that's right here for institutional buyers, and really create that's really helpful. And so this is not to be confused with community gardens. That's really not the kind of thing that can really ever get to scale in urban areas. And it's not about just seasonal produce. It's really about growing food as much as you possibly can. And in hydroponic systems, you can grow about 10 times the amount of produce as you can as you could conventionally in the same exact area. And so we're excited about that kind of opportunity and creating the jobs locally so that you can literally supply institutions in a local area using urban agriculture as well, which makes me, and I think a lot of other people, really happy. And so doing these type of local economic developments is a way to allow folks that are in any given local area to really see how they can be a part of the future transformation, of our country. And it really has been interesting, because I had it kind of hard, like when I first started doing this work, even being perceived as an environmentalist, because I didn't fit the mold, of what an environmentalist looked like. I wasn't male, I wasn't white, and I wasn't old, which is a whole other issue. It's just, after a while, I was just like, oh, I get that too. So y'all being ageist against me as well. But that's a whole other story. But really the kind of common image, that we do have, of environmentalists. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt, who did an enormous amount, obviously, and some not so great things, to really push toward, people thinking about conservation, which was a great, great thing. And John Muir, of course, who was the, considered and still considered like the father of American environmentalism. Here they are, in Yosemite, National Park. But what many Americans didn't know was that, Teddy Roosevelt was able to even go to Yosemite, because there were, the 9th Cavalry, the Buffalo Soldiers, who were actually there, who actually did so much of the work, and exploration in the American West for the national parks. It was a history that almost was just completely forgotten. And a lot of people still don't know about. How many people know about the Buffalo Soldiers? That's an excellent number, because usually people are like, it's a Bob Marley song. Which is actually not about the Buffalo Soldiers. But I literally just got the lyrics. I'm like, well, maybe it is. I just didn't understand it. No, it's not. But so anyway, but this is what, these guys, I mean, there is such a history, of people of color, in the environment in many different ways, and has been since the birth of this country. But it's often not considered a part of what we do. And it was really another interesting thing was like I took my very first trip to a national park to interview a couple people there for my radio show. And two of the people were the people on this side, which was the Frank and Audrey Peterman, who, when they retired in the late 90s, decided they were going to take, a couple months and just visit the national parks because, they both love nature and they were going to go. And they were just shocked that in the whole 2 months, they found 3 people of color in all of these parks, because there clearly was, people weren't going to those things. And so I went to talk to them about what was the impact, why do you think it is that we're not seeing people of color going to, our great American national parks, which is something that belongs to each and every one of us. Every piece of a dollar that we pay goes to support these things, which means that they belong to each and every one of us. And I also interviewed Shelton Johnson, who was practically single-handedly, retrieved and is really putting out, to the general public the fact that Buffalo Soldiers, these former slaves, were a huge part of building the national park system in the American West. And again, a history that was almost forgotten. And so being there and talking to all sorts of people about this, and how are we going to encourage this, to continue to happen? Because a gentleman that I know from works at the Conservation Society, thought that part of what the work that we need to do in terms of the environment is really pushing people to see that if we don't help this generation understand that the environment is bigger than just what's in front of us, then you will be seeing things like subdivisions and strip malls in Yosemite National Park. And that we aren't seeing the connections between any of this, and how we create that kind of connection is how we can also help to restore, the planet that we're in right now. Oh, wait, sorry, I need to go back because I just, sugar honey iced tea, I just gave it all away. But the interesting thing is that here I had, this great opportunity to hang out with these two people, all of color, Black folks, talking about how we can improve, just the idea that the environment is something that really does belong to all of us. And another person I was going to interview was this guy who I was told worked for this group that brought inner city kids out to the park system to talk to them about, the wilderness and how they could actually take that kind of stewardship back to their own communities. And so I heard he was a snowboarder, and I heard he was a ski instructor, and even I just assumed that he was white. I was just like, oh, okay, it's like some blonde beach bunny or snow bunny kind of guy is going to come up to me. So you can imagine my surprise when I saw this guy kind of looks a little like Obama, kind of jaunt up and talk to me. And I realized, oh my gosh, even I'm, here I am who's thrilled when I see other people of color involved in any environmental work, out here doing this kind of thing. And I had my own assumptions about what was white and what was not. I was like, Black men don't ski. Yes, they do. And that's a good thing, because as we think about what our environment, what we've been able to see happen to our environment, because it has been siloed, because there's been the environment that's for these people over here, like our park system, and then there's that place where we put all the nasty things so that we can keep our other nice, beautiful environments safe. And that's why, if we continue to think that way, none of us will be safe. So it's important that as we work toward thinking about, look at just really ripping apart the construct that is race, and knowing that we've put these kind of labels, on ourselves and put them on other people, and then make assumptions about, how people are supposed to act in one area as opposed to what people can expect and to act in other areas, then it all becomes what it is we're dealing with right now. And so here's me going on my little conspiracy theory, right now, and sorry, but I believe it. So Dr. King wrote this as part of the letter from a Birmingham jail a few years before he was killed. But as he was being, just before it was happening, just literally weeks before his passing, very untimely, that was when he was actually starting to organize the Poor People's Movement. And there were, representatives, from the United Farm Workers, Cesar Chavez organization, and there were coal mining, folks that were all meeting together. So the people of different races were getting together because they also understood that, yes, civil rights is because historically right now we need to deal with the civil rights of Black folks because that structurally was an issue at the time. But Dr. King totally understood that it was even bigger than that. And I am not telling you that I do not think race matters. It does. When I walk into a room, and to talk about the urban environment and how we need to ensure that as the point sources for greenhouse gas emissions, that we need to be worried about these places, and you can't just pretend that it's okay to continue to offend and hurt people simply because they happen to be poor and of color. I'm happy, and I will talk about that till the cows come home. But I also will talk about the fact that, that it happens in different ways to different types of people that aren't necessarily of color either. But we have one thing in common, which is poverty. And if we can come to grips on the idea that there is a larger enemy that we have to fight, and that we can use what is environmental equality to create a world that's better for each and every one of us, then I think that this quote that came out of that letter from the Birmingham jail, and it was a direct response to Dr. King's, two white ministers who were telling him to just like chill out on this integration stuff. Take some time off on it. It'll happen sooner or later. And he was like, look, we don't have time for that. That's the way that I feel about the fight for environmental equality for everybody. I don't want anybody to have to go through what my neighborhood does, what Judy Bonds' neighborhood does, because on some level, everybody pays for it in some one way, shape, or form. And so to develop our opportunities where, to know that what happens in our communities impacts the quality of life that people have in other ones, to know that there are solutions that involve improving the environment that also improve our economic as well as our social profile as a nation. To understand that there's different ways that we can really wean ourselves off of the dependence of fossil fuels, and stop getting it from nations that really do not like us. I mean, that's an understatement. But it sort of drives me crazy that a portion of every dollar that we spend on oil goes directly to a region in Saudi Arabia that we know produces terrorists. Why would we not want to see how do we, stop supporting, these huge tributes to our own failures, as opposed to building the kind of monuments that will live and will keep on living and building these things of hope and possibility. That's what I want. And I bet you do too. Thanks. Okay.
I would be happy to take questions. If you please line up over here if you'd like to ask a question. If you can't line up, please wait and we'll come to you. But otherwise, line up here for questions, please.
Okay. All right, we'll see you later. Oh.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I think, wait, do we need to have you on mic?
So loud.
No, I think it's for the video internet people to see you. Hi.
Thank you so much for being here.
Walk into the mic.
I saw your first presentation probably 2 years ago online, and I've been hoping to see you ever since, so thank you.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you've experienced through these years of working on this movie in the Bronx, if that has taken hold of any other communities around you.
Oh yeah, it's been really fun. I didn't know at all, how much the work, the example that we put out there actually it was empowering lots of folks all over. I mean, places in this country as well as outside of the country. Like I was actually in Lisbon in Portugal, where a group was founded after watching my TED Talk, which was kind of cool. And I would like to think that we also were part of inspiring the idea of green jobs, in this country, which is really. I wish somebody, like Obama would hire me to help him really do it effectively, but that hasn't happened yet. Because I'm like, those are just mistakes you're making. I don't get it. But anyway, no, he hasn't asked me yet.
I too have been looking forward to I'd like to take this opportunity actually to invite you to the one in Connecticut to speak there.
Where in Connecticut?
In London.
Oh, okay.
I've had the pleasure of meeting Cornell West and several other prominent people there. But my question is, a few years ago we were talking about the death of the environmental movement, and I feel that the environmentalists, we abrogated our responsibilities to federal agencies, and I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
That they've, say that, what was the question?
We abrogated our responsibilities for protect the environment to federal agencies, and I think that kind of came back to haunt us when they started cutting budgets.
Yeah, oh, I would absolutely agree with you, on that. I mean, it has been, like I think I mentioned before, that part of the work that has been, I think, a terrible kind of thing is that we've not been, sort of watching, the hen house, in terms of like what was actually being supported or not supported in terms of our energy policy, in terms of how brownfields are created or not, our food policy, and that's why so many of the issues that we're dealing with are happening right now. I think you're totally right.
I'm wondering if you have any observations or concerns that these bringing up the neighborhoods and improvements could actually price out.
Yeah, I've got big concerns about that, and I think that one of the reasons, or not, I think I know that one of the reasons why I focus as heavily as we do on job development and economic development that can actually that can happen locally, and that you include people in that, is that when people feel, when they are economically empowered, then they become better advocates, for themselves and for their livelihoods and for their own communities. And so that's where the whole idea of like not moving out of your neighborhood, you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one, absolutely implies that you were a part of getting it better. And so creating the kind of localized, economic development projects is the way to do that. And that's why we're spending as much time as we're spending on building projects around urban micro-agribusiness that are local entities, and doing the kind of hometown security core where you're doing environmental services in those areas, and you're training the people from those areas to do that work.
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks for coming. It was also really nice to talk to you in class this afternoon. And this is something we talked about in class, but it's something I'm really interested about. What would you say specifically to the leaders of developing world countries who argue that cutting corners environmentally is the only way to catch up?
I'm sorry. One more time.
The leaders in the developing world who argue that not green types of projects are the only way that they can catch up to the West economically.
Right. I heard this great saying many years ago that it was actually from an environmental engineer, that when people talk about like, oh, I want an air conditioner, it's not that they want an air conditioner. What they want is a cooler room. And if you can figure out a way to make a room cooler, they're not going to ask for the air conditioner. So that I think that burden is on us, to look at, what are some of the available technologies? What is it that we can do? And I do think that we're going to have to pay, for to support folks to not make the same stupid mistakes that we did, and really think about, how do we leapfrog, or do the same way that many in the developing countries like leapfrogged over the cell phone, regular landlines and straight into cell phones. I mean, there are opportunities for that right now. I mean, I have a friend who, actually a mentor, she's a little older than I am, who, when she was working with the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Conservation, they had actually already developed a prototype for the electric car, like in the 1970s. So it's not like this stuff does not exist. It's just that, for reasons that are known, I think, to all of us, that it was politically, stopped in order to allow things to happen in a better way for some interests, not the people.
Some of the slides that you showed were really amazing. It seems like, some of the programs that you would help bring forward help make really great strides in the community. So what I want to know is, why should I care? Me, who was born and raised in middle-class suburban Warwick, Rhode Island, I go to school on this beautiful, lovely green campus at URI. So why should I care about this project when
Right.
You know,
That's an excellent question, but as a tax-paying American, you actually are paying, whether you care or not, for the environmental degradation that happens. And all of this, both the social, consequences associated with having communities that are environmentally challenged, from the public health problems, to, we know that there is a direct link between incarceration, and proximity to fossil fuel emissions. We know that the cleanups, to what we know are going to happen, that we know that the second highest federal insurance cost is actually, after Social Security, is flood insurance. So we know that if we train, but by association, if we train people to do the work that actually, to do the environmental services that can help us with that, then what we're doing is actually supporting communities that otherwise would end up on our tax, as our tax burdens. And that's what they are right now. So there's always money to do these things. It's just, how do we want to spend it? Like, do we want to know that, our tax burdens are going to, continue a cycle of poverty and ill health and, mental non-well-being? Or do we want to know that people are, in their communities, happy where they are so they don't have to come to yours? I don't know.
We have a lot, I teach rebuild as a class.
Could you put it up to your mouth a little bit more?
I teach rebuild as a class, state prison,
Excellent.
construction. But also I've been asked to maybe project manage 7 city blocks in Providence, and go with the green collar jobs. So I was just wondering if
You really have to keep it up, because I swear I can't, I hear every other
do you
word.
have representatives locally that I could use as a resource, or contact you directly?
No, I don't have anybody in Rhode Island now, but we should definitely talk afterward. I'd be happy to. Cool. That's great.
hi.
Hi.
Honestly, I have, first of all, I want to mention one part.
Thank you.
Beautiful black woman, strong.
Thank you.
Honestly, I have never thought of going to be the way that you have presented today. I come from an urban setting, and I also see the lack of change in my community. As a minority, I always hear other minorities speak, that they have housing, as people on my family.
Right.
I never thought of asking why until today. But as a young feminist, I'm sorry, it's a question
Good for you.
student in writing here, what can we do as young professionals to help?
Did you say what you did?
I'm a senior.
You're a senior here. Okay, well, first of all, finish school. The first thing. And, I think, community starts right where you are. So definitely, this is a beautiful campus, but, I heard a phrase today, which I'd never heard before from, where is she? From Gail. Town and gown. I'd never heard that phrase before, but it's true, but there's all sorts of issues between where the local town is and what's considered the privileged, university. I think looking for interactions that actually support, community building between the university and the town itself are also going to be really smart things to do. And also, as someone who is clearly a leader already, in her community, figuring out ways where you can really help folks spread the message about the kind of things that you now know, because that's more than half the battle. Much of it is if you were thinking why does folks in my family, why are they suffering from this, and didn't make the connection before, and it's not uncommon that you wouldn't, it really isn't. You being able to share that message about how they can improving their health, and just making sure that they understand that there are reasons behind it that have nothing to do with them is a really powerful thing to do. But also, another thing that I'm really excited about your generation doing is developing new businesses that are really smart and do not depend on developing more fossil fuel based infrastructure, and really creating opportunities to see how you can grow these kind of businesses. That's really why we're focusing almost exclusively now on the kind of small business ventures that can happen locally, because I think that's building our local economy is exactly how we're going to work to make these things better for everybody concerned. Yeah. Hi.
I have a question. You mentioned earlier about employing people that were in jail before had been incarcerated.
Right.
And my interest is in that. You see people who are come out of jail, some people do change and try to, be successful individuals, but unfortunately, the job market right now is really not there.
Right.
There are not a lot of jobs available, especially for people that have gone to jail.
Right.
What do you see in the future for those people?
Right. And it's been interesting because look, I was as thrilled as anybody that has being frankly one of the people that was involved in really spearheading and pushing green collar jobs in the country. When Obama started talking about it, I was beside myself. It's like, oh my God, he said green jobs. He said it again. But the interesting thing about it was that so many of the jobs really went to that would be walking over, like when he'd go to what do you call it, a ribbon cutting, or someplace that got a whole bunch of Recovery Act money, at a place, up in, Michigan or whatever. It would be great because there were jobs, and like, I'm happy there were jobs anywhere, frankly. But many of the jobs would go right to people that walked over, from the auto industry. They were not the folks coming straight out of jail. And, and it was clear to me that those folks were going to be locked out of a lot of different jobs. And so, but jobs in the kind of horticultural infrastructure that I showed here, and the fact that they are, cost-effective ways to create the kind of environmental services that we need in terms of stormwater management, energy conservation, all that kind of stuff. And with the right training, I mean, this is not like, I know because I trained people to do this work before, not me personally, but we created the programs to do it. And it really is, it's like you've got to get training to do it. So it's not like sharecropping. I mean, it's got some technical experience behind it, but they're the type of jobs that these folks can do, and that because of whatever policies are out there, they can do. And so developing, different kinds of jobs with different types of career paths in the green economy is really important. And that's why we focus as much as we do on these types of jobs, because right now there's a whole bunch of people with or without green jobs that are left out of a whole bunch of jobs. It's a dirty little secret that nobody really likes to talk about, but it is the absolute truth. And so that's why we do this kind of that we have that focus, and it is specifically to support folks who need that kind of support, because if they don't go, I don't think most people, if given a choice between, doing, a job that, works with their hands, that, gets them the kind of skills they need, to do it, that they're not going to do that as opposed to doing something that's going to send them to jail. Period.
We'll take this one last question.
Thank you. I'm a community activist from the Ghetto also, and there's a couple of fundamentals that we're trying to shift to a major sustainability program like you're talking, from environment and food, all the way to capital economics, including free jobs.
Yeah.
But the thing that's occurred to at least several of us is that it appears to be a major perspective shift among the population. And I'm really after your experience and what you think of that. From most people tend to not have responsibility for their own community. They're waiting for the state and for the federal government to roll the master plan in. And feel almost helpless against these great plans in the sky. And it seems we need to get ourselves to accept that we're responsible for our local community.
Well, I think on some level, you're absolutely right that there is some of that I absolutely agree with, that there is a feeling that, yes, there's the government that's going to do this. Yeah. And a part of it does stem from that. It's just sort of like, there's nothing that I can do, which I think is the overwhelming feeling that people have, is that the problems are so big, of course, somebody else has to deal with it. And so much of what our work really tries to help people see is that, there's going to be, if you try to attack the big, massive problem, of course, you're not going to do anything. You're just not. But if you take a piece and you focus on that, you can. And if you build capacity around other folks to actually believe the same thing, then you actually, it's manageable. And so but I do, and I'm not going to take it off because I think I'm not, for big or little government, I'm for good government. And they have to be real players in understanding that some of the decisions and policies and regulations that they created did more harm than good. And that has to be, a piece of it. But it's more of a partnership rather than any one group doing it, because there's just some things that the community is not going to be able to do. It just won't. But when you feel empowered, as a group or even just as an individual, it's harder for you to just like accept stuff that isn't great. But you also have to, be at a point where you know that you can even ask that question. So, but I think that's where most people are, where they don't even feel as though they have the right to do that.
Thank you very much for all being here tonight. We hope we'll see you again next week when B.D. Wong, the Tony Award-winning actor, will be speaking about race and representation. Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Carter, for
So do I. Okay,